So, my sister spent her entire teenage years being humiliated in her own home, moved 400 miles away at 18 to escape it, and did not look back once. When she got engaged, she sent wedding invitations to everyone who had earned a place at her table. My brother's envelope never left the house. My parents lost their minds. I sat in their living room, listened to every word of it, and then asked my mother one question that made the room go completely quiet. By the time I left, my parents understood for the first time that the family they thought they had built looked entirely different from where the rest of us were standing. Original post. I am 33 years old and I have 2 younger siblings, my brother Mike, 31, and my sister Kelly, also 31. Mike was the golden child from the moment our parents decided his rugby ability made him special, which happened around the time he was 12 and never stopped happening. The problem with building an identity around a 12-year-old's athletic promise is that the promise eventually has to pay out, and Mike's never did. He had no work ethic to supplement the talent, and so the talent quietly evaporated while the entitlement it had generated stayed completely intact. He cannot hold a job because he considers most work beneath him. He cannot hold a relationship because he expects the person in front of him to absorb whatever he dishes out. He is 31 years old and still living at home, his parents still managing his laundry and his moods, and my mother and father still treating this as a temporary situation that will resolve itself if everyone is patient enough. What they never treated as temporary was what Mike did to Kelly. The prank started small and got progressively worse once I left for university and was no longer around to intervene. The worst I witnessed in person happened at a family wedding when Kelly was 15. Mike grabbed the hem of her dress and pulled it up in front of every relative in the room. Kelly's face, that specific combination of humiliation and the desperate composure of someone who knows crying will only make it worse, is something I have not been able to forget in nearly 2 decades. My parents laughed it off as sibling banter. The faces of every other adult in that room told a different story. By the time Kelly was 18, she had made a decision that I only understood fully later. She had been planning since she was 11 to study at St. Andrews. Close enough to feel like a real step away from home, ambitious enough to feel like a genuine achievement. She abandoned that plan entirely and chose Imperial College London instead, not because London was better, but because 400 miles was a distance she could use. When I asked her directly why she had changed her mind, she told me that St. Andrews was too close and she would have been pressured to come home on weekends. London gave her a clean excuse to return only at Christmas. My heart broke when she said it. She had sacrificed a dream she had carried for 7 years just to get far enough away from her own brother. Once she left, Kelly held the distance firm. Home only at Christmas, and once for my own wedding. My parents complained endlessly that she was abandoning the family, and I kept my head down because I did not yet have the language for what I was watching, or the energy to use it even if I had. When Kelly graduated and stayed in southern England for work, my parents expected her to come back. She did not. 6 years ago, Kelly met Jake. She called me the same day with a kind of barely contained joy I had never heard from her before, and when I met him myself I understood it immediately. He is warm, funny, employed in a way that reflects genuine competence rather than inherited opportunity, and he treats my sister as though she is the most valuable person in whatever room they share. His family are decent people. He is also 6'3" and has trained in martial arts since he was 4 years old, which became relevant the next time Mike tried to make Kelly into a punchline. When Kelly and Jake finally came back to visit, Mike reverted within hours. He was jealous of the attention Jake was receiving. Everyone wanted to meet him, no one was particularly interested in performing enthusiasm for Mike's non-achievements, and so he decided to restore the old dynamic. He crept up behind Kelly with a bowl of water, intending to dump it over her head. Jake stepped smoothly in front of her before anything happened, looked at Mike with the focused patience of someone who is deciding how seriously to take a situation, and told him not to think about it. Mike started whining about jokes and lighthearted fun. Jake told him, with a specificity that left no interpretive room, that if Mike pranked Kelly again, he would introduce Mike's foot to a location it had not previously occupied. My parents tried to frame this as Jake overreacting to harmless fun. Jake was not overreacting and it was not harmless fun. Kelly and Jake left about an hour later, and Kelly has not been back since. The wedding invitations went out in February for an August ceremony. Mike did not receive one. My parents received theirs, and that is when the real drama began. Update 1. My parents lost their composure when they understood what the guest list meant. My mother called, then my father, then both of them together, and then individually again. They threatened not to attend. Kelly responded that our grandfather could walk her down the aisle, and she said it with a lightness that told me she had already made peace with that possibility before anyone had even threatened it. I went around to my parents' house that weekend with my children. My mother started the moment I walked in the door. She began recounting, at volume, every grievance she had about Kelly and the wedding and the injustice of the whole situation, and I let her go for as long as I could before I ran out of tolerance. I asked her what exactly she had expected. I said she and my father had spent 20 years protecting Mike from consequences and positioning him as the special one, and the result was a 31-year-old man who could not hold a job or a relationship and was still living in their spare room. I said Kelly had spent her teenage years being publicly humiliated in her own home, had given up a university she had dreamed about since childhood to put physical distance between herself and her brother, and had built a full, happy life 400 miles away specifically because coming back was something she needed to survive rather than something she wanted to do. I said I did not trust Mike around my own children without supervision. I said the question was not why Kelly had not invited him, the question was why they were surprised. My mother went silent and asked me to leave. My father called a few hours later, furious, and told me I had upset my mother and was taking the side of an ungrateful daughter over the parents who had given us everything. That unlocked a response I had been storing for a long time. I told him he had been a poor father to Kelly for years, that he had watched what happened in his own home and decided it was easier to call it sibling banter than to address it, and that he did not deserve to walk her down the aisle. Extended family began weighing in almost immediately after that call, a few of them telling me I had gone too far, that my mother was barely speaking to anyone and was always in tears. My grandfather, my father's father, said it was about time someone told them the truth. My grandmother was upset by the conflict itself, which I understood. Kelly is not changing her mind. My grandfather will walk her down the aisle. My parents will not be at the wedding unless they choose to go somewhere they have been told they are not welcome, which became its own concern later. Update 2. I sat my children down and asked them directly how they felt about visiting my parents. My daughter said she found it boring and thought Mike was strange. My son said something that landed harder. He told me he did not like visiting my father because my father kept pressuring him to play rugby, despite being told repeatedly to stop. My son has no interest in sports. He spends his Thursday evenings at a Pokemon card tournament at our local shop and considers the time sacred. Rugby is not happening. I told my father that if he raised it again in my son's presence, visits would stop. He insisted rugby would be good for my son. I told him that was not the question I had asked. I then asked my parents directly what their plan was for Mike long term. Were they going to be looking after him at 90, my mother still managing his meals and his laundry? Who did they think was going to take on that responsibility when they were no longer able to? I was moving back to my husband's hometown once my children were grown. Kelly lived in southern England and had built a life there that did not include coming back to Scotland to manage an adult brother. Mike was completely incapable of looking after himself and would be the first to confirm it if it ever served his interests to do so. They stared at me. The blankness was genuine, they had not run the calculation. I mentioned the will. I know they intend to leave everything to Mike. I told them plainly that given how Mike has been raised, whatever they leave him will not survive a year. I watched my mother's face do something complicated. Either she had never considered it, or she had assumed I would silently pick up the slack once the money was gone. She now knows that is not happening. I made clear what low contact would look like going forward, and I left. A few weeks later, I went down to visit Kelly and Jake. It was the first time in a long while that I saw her completely relaxed, the particular physical ease of someone who has removed themselves from a source of stress and finally stopped carrying it. We ate Thai food, drank wine, debated the wedding playlist, and laughed properly for the first time in months. She told me Mike had made noises about crashing the wedding. The same Mike who had been making theatrical announcements about relocating to Spain was now apparently planning to make a statement at the ceremony. Jake had already spoken to the venue. 2 of his groomsmen are off-duty police officers, fully briefed on the family situation. Kelly laughed and said Mike could try, but he would not get past Tom or Austin. The following day, Kelly's phone lit up with messages sent from my mother using my father's account, a series of old family photographs, each captioned either "Remember when we were all happy" or "We'll be thinking of you on your special day." Emotional manipulation in image format, delivered in a chain. Jake offered to reply on her behalf. Kelly declined and set her phone face down. We talked seriously later that afternoon about what came next. Kelly told me she had started seeing a therapist, not because she was struggling with her own decision, but because she found herself worrying about my parents' well-being after the wedding, and wanted somewhere to put that without letting it contaminate her happiness. She asked me whether it was wrong to cut them out entirely. I told her no. I told her that children are not insurance policies against their parents' loneliness, and that what she had done was not rejection, it was survival, and then it became a life. We decided that any future boundary crossing would be met with consequences rather than further attempts at explanation. Update 3. Jake called a few days later, moving fast. Someone had called the venue claiming to be Kelly, asking questions about the timing of entrances, the layout, and menu choices. The staff flagged it immediately: wrong accent, odd email address, questions a bride would not need to ask about her own wedding. Jake received the full report by email. Not long after, Mike updated his Facebook with a photograph of a suitcase and a passport alongside a cryptic note about having a better summer than some people and heading for the sun. 3 aunts texted me to say they were glad he was finding his independence. I noted the passport photo had been taken in what was clearly his bedroom. My grandmother rang me that evening, distressed. My father had been around to her house ranting about losing both daughters. My mother was barely eating. Mike was sleeping until noon and going out until the early morning, and my parents were at their limit. My grandmother listened to what I had to say about all of it, and then she said something I was not expecting. She told me that if Kelly and I could not make peace with our parents on terms that were fair to us, perhaps that was not our failure. Perhaps, she said, this was what it looked like when the patterns of a generation finally stopped. The hen weekend was a small rental house, close friends, Jake's sister, me. Food, wine, a bonfire in the garden, marshmallows, and old karaoke, and a night that felt entirely free. Near midnight, Kelly read aloud a letter she had written to Mike but decided not to send, honest, unguarded, neither cruel nor forgiving but somewhere true and final. She said she hoped he found out who he was and what family actually meant, but that she could not do that work for him. All of us cried a little. It was the first time any of us had said out loud that not every sibling relationship can be repaired, and that accepting that was not giving up, it was clarity. Update 4. 3 weeks before the wedding, Mike found TikTok. He launched an account and posted a series of videos, rambling monologues about family betrayal and cryptic references to traitor sisters, with one video stitched over a weddings gone wrong compilation in which he strongly implied that some people were about to receive a surprise on their big day. He captioned it with the assertion that family is family whether they like it or not. Local acquaintances flagged it to us quickly. Jake found it both absurd and worth documenting. Security was already in place. The TikTok simply gave them something to add to the briefing file. Mike then deployed a mutual friend, someone I will call Oily Dan, who had accompanied him on the failed Spain trip that had ended, as predicted, in Newcastle, to contact Kelly directly and offer a vague apology on Mike's behalf. Oily Dan followed the apology by asking if he could come to the wedding for a bit, reasoning that there were not many decent places to meet people up north. Kelly forwarded me the message. We laughed until we could not breathe and then blocked them both. The venue called to report that a Mr. Smith had phoned claiming to be close family, asking about available rooms, and when refused had demanded to speak to the manager of the bride. The venue was logging everything, recording calls, and had already sent the information to Jake by email in case it was needed elsewhere. Mike's final act was a group email sent to every family member he could reach, titled A Family Plea for Reunification. It ran to multiple paragraphs and contained self-pity, attempted logic, thinly veiled threats about karma arriving on important occasions, and a misquoted line from The Godfather. My grandmother replied within 5 minutes. She told him that learning to apologize properly was all anyone had ever wanted from him, and that he should try it. Jake arranged for a formal no trespass letter to be delivered to my parents and to Mike. He hand-delivered them himself. Then, unexpectedly, the noise stopped. My mother went silent on all channels. My father followed. 5 days before the wedding, a short letter arrived from my father. No accusations, no manipulation, no demands. It said they would respect Kelly's wishes and would not be attending. It said they hoped she knew they had done their best. Kelly cried when she read it. Not from grief exactly, but from the particular weight of a chapter that has finally closed. She said it was the first honest thing she had received from him in years. The wedding is 10 days away as I write this. The guest list is settled. Security is briefed. The cake has more fondant pistache than flowers, by specific and enthusiastic request. My son has been practicing his toast. My daughter is making a sign for the venue entrance. I bought a new dress without once worrying about whether something was going to be ruined. My grandfather will walk Kelly down the aisle. She will be surrounded by every person who has earned a place in her life. And for the first time in longer than I can properly account for, I woke up this morning without the low-level certainty that something was about to go wrong. If it does go wrong, we will handle it. But this does not feel like bracing anymore. It feels like going forward. Edit, for everyone who asked whether I was wrong to say what I said to my parents at their house that day. I had been watching Kelly manage the consequences of their choices for nearly 20 years. I had watched her give up a university dream at 18 to put enough physical distance between herself and her own home that coming back stopped being something she was expected to do casually. I had watched my parents reframe every piece of that as Kelly being difficult. No, I was not wrong. If anything, I was about 15 years late. Edit 2, for the people asking whether Mike might actually show up at the wedding. 2 off-duty police officers among the groomsmen. Professional security at the venue. A full documentation file assembled by Jake covering every threat, every phone call, every TikTok. The venue coordinator told Kelly she had managed Russian oligarch weddings and once removed a goat from a dance floor, and that our situation did not concern her. I believe her. Edit 3, for the people suggesting I should have been more supportive of my mother given how distressed she appeared. My mother had the opportunity to be supportive of Kelly across 20 years of living in the same house as her. She had the opportunity every time Mike crossed a line and she laughed it off. She had the opportunity every time Kelly came home at Christmas and clearly needed a parent to notice what she was carrying. The distress my mother is experiencing now is real, and I have some sympathy for it, but distress is not the same as being wronged, and I am done treating them as equivalent. Edit 4, for the people asking what I think will happen with my parents long term. Honestly, I do not know. My father's letter was the first communication I can remember from him that was free of manipulation, and that means something, even if I am not sure yet what it means in practice. My mother is harder to read. What I do know is that Kelly and I have both built lives that are genuinely good, with people who treat us well, and that neither of us is available to absorb the consequences of choices our parents made over 2 decades. If they find their way to something more honest, there may be room for a different kind of relationship eventually. If they do not, we will be all right regardless. What I keep coming back to, sitting here in the quiet of a week that does not have a family crisis embedded in it, is how much energy I spent for how many years managing the temperature of rooms I had not heated, choosing words carefully enough that nobody could accuse me of being dramatic, absorbing my father's silences and my mother's performances and Mike's entitlement as though they were weather conditions I had to dress for rather than choices people were making. The sheer accumulated weight of keeping one's mouth shut across 2 decades, not because there was nothing to say but because experience had taught me that saying it would result in being called the problem. I have been thinking about what it cost Kelly specifically. She is the one who paid the steepest price across the longest stretch of time, and she paid it without once making it about drama or public grievance. She simply made decisions, about university, about geography, about how much of herself she was prepared to expose to people who had demonstrated they would not protect it, and she made them quietly and rebuilt her life around them, and the life she built is genuinely good. Jake is genuinely good. The people she has chosen to keep around her are people who have earned that position, and watching her plan a wedding surrounded entirely by those people is something I have found unexpectedly moving. My grandmother made a remark at the coffee meeting that I have returned to several times. She said that perhaps this was what it looked like when the generational tides begin to shift, her words, which surprised me coming from a woman of her age and from a generation that had tended to prioritize family unity over individual honesty. I think she was right. I think what Kelly and I are living through is exactly that, a moment where the old mechanics, where the child manages the parent's feelings indefinitely, where the disruptive sibling's behavior is absorbed by the quieter siblings as the price of keeping peace, simply stop working, not because someone decided to burn everything down, but because the people who had been absorbing things quietly finally filled up and stopped. My son is planning his toast for the wedding reception. He is 12, careful with words, and has been writing and rewriting it for 3 weeks on a notepad he keeps by his bed. He asked me last week whether it was okay to say something nice about Kelly without mentioning any of the family drama at all, whether he could just talk about what she was like as an aunt and what it felt like to watch her be so happy. I told him that was exactly what a toast was supposed to do. He went back to his notepad looking satisfied. My daughter has made a small illustrated sign for the venue entrance. It says, in her handwriting with drawings of flowers around the border, "Welcome to the best day." She spent an evening on it at the kitchen table while I was cooking dinner, showing it to me at intervals to ask whether it was done yet, and each time I said almost but you could add something more, and each time she did. She is 9 and she has more instinct for what a room needs than most adults I have met. These are the people I am focused on now. My children, my husband, my sister, the life we are all building in spaces where the rules are made by people who have agreed to be decent to each other. The situation with my parents is unresolved and may remain so, and I have made enough peace with that to stop letting it govern my energy. The situation with Mike is essentially finished, not through any dramatic confrontation but through the simple accumulation of evidence that he is not a person who can be reached by reason or consequence, and that waiting for that to change is not a strategy, it is a way of handing him years you cannot get back. Kelly will be married in just over a week. Our grandfather will walk her down the aisle with his particular slow dignity, the same man who told me years ago that it was about time someone said the obvious out loud. Jake will be standing at the end of that aisle in what I understand is a genuinely excellent suit, having somehow managed to remain calm and methodical through weeks of TikTok threats and fake phone calls and group emails quoting The Godfather. The police officers will be positioned where they need to be. The venue coordinator will be managing the room with the same competence she brought to the oligarch wedding and the goat situation. And Kelly will have, for one complete and protected day, exactly the celebration she earned, on her own terms, in a room she chose, surrounded by people who chose her back. That is enough. That is actually more than enough. It is the whole point.